All right, we're on chapter 29. Chapter 29. I was going to say, record it and I'll upload it still. Yeah, I could still do that. We've read 17 books, 200 days into the sunathon, imagine. Okay, so quick little recap. If you guys, would like to honestly catch up on a lot of the readings, ! React in the chat. We upload all of our readings onto that channel. But quick little recap in the last two chapters. Feyre got sent away. Feyre got sent away. So after making love with Tomlin, they literally just boned, and then Tomlin was like, yo. Tomlin was literally like, yo, I'm going to call the Uber. All right? Calls a carriage and escorts her back home. It was kind of crazy. So she just got home, and her whole family got a lot of money. And yeah, and they just welcomed Feyre and was like, yo, what's up? Welcome back. So yeah, that's basically what happened. I predicted, listen, who remembers my prediction? I guarantee that's what happens. Anyway, we're going to continue anyway. He really did not even think about that? Yeah, literally pump, dump, called an Uber, was like, yo, it's coming to pick your ass up. So, yep, let's get into it. Inventing stories about my time with Aunt Ripley required minimal effort. I read to her daily. She instructed me on deportment from her bedside, and I nursed her until she died in her sleep 2 weeks ago, leaving her fortune to me. So, basically, little recap, she pretended to be living with her aunt because she couldn't tell her family that she was living with high fae and fairies and all that, right? So, and what a tremendous fortune it was. The trunks that accompanied me hadn't contained just clothing. Several of them had been filled with gold and jewels. Not cut jewels either, but enormous raw jewels that would pay for 1,000 estates. My father was currently taking inventory of those jewels. He had holed himself up into the office that overlooked the garden in which I was sitting beside Elaine in the grass. Through the window, I spied my father, hunched over his desk, a little scale before him as he weighed an uncut ruby the size of a duck's egg. He was clear-eyed again and moved with a sense of purpose, of vibrancy that I hadn't seen since before the downfall. Even his limp was improved, made miraculously better by some tonic and a salve a strange passing healer had given him for free. I would have forever been grateful to Tomlin for that kindness alone. Gone were his hunched shoulders and downcast, misty eyes. My father smiled freely, laughed readily, and doted on Elaine, who in turn doted on him. Nesta, though, had been quiet and watchful, only given Elaine answers not longer than a word or two. These bulbs, Elaine said, pointing with a gloved hand to a cluster of purple and white flowers, came all the way from the tulip fields of the continent. Father promised that next spring he'll take me to see them. He claims that for mile after mile there's nothing but these flowers. She patted the rich, dark soil. The little garden beneath the windows was hers. Every bloom and shrub had been picked and planted by her hand. She would allow no one else to care for it. Even the weeding and watering she did on her own. Though the servants did help her carry over the heavy watering cans, she admitted, she would have marveled, likely wept at the gardens I'd become so accustomed to, at the flowers in perpetual bloom at the spring court. You should come with me, Elaine went on. Nesta won't go, because she says she doesn't want to risk the sea crossing, but you and I, oh, we'd have fun, wouldn't we? I glanced sidelong at her. My sister was beaming, content, prettier than I've ever seen her. Even her simple muslin gardening dress, or muslin? I don't know. Her cheeks were flushed beneath a large floppy hat. I think I'd like to see the continent, I said. It was true, I realized. There was so much of the world that I hadn't seen. Hadn't even thought about visiting, hadn't even been able to dream of visiting. I'm surprised you're so eager to go next spring, I said. Isn't that right in the middle of the season? The socialite season, which had been ending a few weeks ago. Apparently full of parties and balls and luncheons and gossip, gossip, gossip. Elaine had told me about it all at dinner the night before, hardly noticing that was an effort for me to get down my food. So much of it was the same, the meats, the bread, the vegetables, and yet it was ash in my mouth compared to what I'd consumed in Prithian. And I'm surprised you don't have a line of suitors out the door begging for your hand. Elaine flushed, but plunged her little shovel into the ground to dig out a weed. Yes, well, there will always be other seasons. Nesta won't tell you, but this season was somewhat strange. In what way? She shrugged her slim shoulders. People act as if we'd all just been ill for 8 years, or had gone away for some distant country. Not that we'd been a few villages over in the cottage. You'd think we dreamed it all up. What happened to us over those years? No one said a word about it. Did you think they would? If they were as rich as this house suggested, there were surely plenty of families willing to overlook the strain of her poverty. No, but it made me wish for those years again, even with the hunger and cold. This house feels so big sometimes, and Father is always busy, and Nesta, she looked over her shoulder to where my elder sister stood by a gnarled mulberry tree, looking out over the flat expanse of her lands. She'd barely spoken to me the night before, and not at all during breakfast. I've been surprised when she joined us outside, even if she'd stayed by the tree this whole time. Nesta didn't finish the season. She wouldn't tell me why. She began refusing every invitation. She hardly talks to anyone, and I feel wretched when my friends pay a visit, because she makes them so uncomfortable when she stares at them in that way of hers. Elaine sighed. Maybe you could talk to her. I contemplated telling Elaine that Nesta and I hadn't had a civil conversation in years, but then Elaine added, she went to see you, you know? I blinked, my blood going a bit cold. What? Well, she was gone for only about a week, and she said that her... Oh, shit. And she said that her carriage broke down not halfway there, and it was easier to come back, but you wouldn't know since you never got any of our letters. I looked over at Nesta standing so still under the branches, the summer breeze rustling the skirts of her dress. Has she gone to see me, only to be turned back by whatever glamour magic Tomlin had cast on her? I turned back to the garden and caught Elaine staring at me. What? Elaine shook her head and went back to the wedding. You just look so different. You sound so different, too. Indeed, I hadn't quite believed my eyes when I passed the hall mirror last night. My face was still the same, but there was a glow about me. Is she pregnant? A kind of shimmering light that was nearly undetectable. I knew without a doubt that it was because my time in Prithian, that all that magic had somehow rubbed off on me. I dreaded the day it would forever fade. Did something happen at Aunt Ripley's house? Elaine asked. Did you meet someone? I shrugged and yanked at a weed nearby. Just good food and rest. Wait, what? What's going on? Days passed. The shadow within me didn't lighten, and even the thought of painting was aberrant. Instead, I spent most of my time with Elaine in her garden. I was content to listen to her about every bud and bloom, about her plan to start another garden by the greenhouse, perhaps the vegetable garden, if she could learn enough about it over the next few months. She had come alive here, and her joy was infectious. There wasn't a servant or gardener who didn't smile at her, and even the brusque head cook found excuses to bring her plates of cookies and tarts at various points in the day. I marveled at it, especially that those years of poverty hadn't stripped away that light from Elaine, perhaps buried it a bit. But she was generous, loving, and kind, a woman I found myself proud to know, to call sister. My father finished counting the jewels and gold. I was an extraordinarily wealthy woman. I invested a small percentage of it in his businesses. When I look at the remaining behemoth sum, I had him draw me up several bags of money and set out. The manor was only 3 miles from our rundown cottage, and the road was familiar. I didn't mind when my hem became coated in mud from the sodden path. I savored hearing the wind in the trees and the sighing of the high grasses. If I drifted far enough into my memories, I could imagine myself walking alongside Tomlin through his woods. I had no reason to believe that I would see him anytime soon, but I went to bed each night praying that I'd awaken to find myself in his manor, or that I'd receive a message summoning me to his side. Even worse than my disappointment that no such thing had happened was the creeping, nagging fear that he was in danger, that Amarantha, whoever she was, would somehow hurt him. I love you. I could almost hear those words, almost hear him saying them. I could almost see the sunlight glinting in his golden hair and the dazzling green of his eyes. I could almost feel his body pressed against mine, his fingers playing along my skin. I reached a bend in that road that I could have navigated in the dark, and there it was, so small. The cottage had been so small. Elaine's old flower garden was a wild tangle of weeds and blooms, and the ward markings were still etched on the stone threshold. The front door, shattered and broken the last time I'd seen it, had been replaced, but one of the circular window panes had become cracked. The inferior was dark, the lands undisturbed. I traced the invisible path I'd taken across the tall grass every morning from our front door, over the road, and then across the rolling field, all the way to that line of trees, the forest, my forest. It had seemed so terrifying once, so lethal and hungry and brutal, and now it just seemed plain, ordinary. I gazed at it again at the sad, dark house, the place that had been a prison. Elaine had said she missed it, and I wondered what she saw when she looked at the cottage. If she beheld not a prison but a shelter from a world that had possessed so little good, but she tried to find it anyway, even if it had seemed foolish and useless to me. She had looked at that cottage with hope. I had looked at it with nothing but hatred, and I knew which one of us had been stronger. Chapter 30. Chapter 30. We'll keep going. Yeah. I had one task left to do before I returned to my father's manor. The villagers who had once sneered at or ignored me instead gaped now, and a few stepped into my path to ask about my aunt, my fortune, on and on. I firmly but politely refused to fall into conversation with them, to give them anything to gossip over, but it still took me so long to reach the poor part of our village that I was fully drained by the time I knocked on the first dilapidated door. The impoverished of our village didn't ask questions when I handed them the little bags of silver and gold. They tried to refuse, some of them not even recognizing me, but I left the money anyway. It was the least I could do. As I walked back to my father's manor, I passed Tomas Mondre and his cronies lurking by the village fountain, chatting about some house that had been burned down with its family trapped inside a week before, and whether there was anything to loot from it. He gave me a too long look, his eyes rowing freely over my body with the half-smile I'd seen him give to the village girls 100 times before. Why had Nesta changed her mind? I just stared him down and continued along. I was almost out of town when a woman's laughter flitted over the stones, and I turned a corner to come face to face with Isaac Hale and a pretty plump young woman who could only be his new wife. They were arm in arm, both smiling, both lit up from within. His smile faltered as he beheld me. Human. He seemed so human, with his gangly limbs, his simple handsomeness. But that smile he'd been moments before had transformed him into something more. His wife looked between us, perhaps a bit nervously, as if whatever she felt for him, the love I'd already seen shining, was so new, so unexpected, that she was still worried it would vanish. Carefully, Isaac inclined his head to me in greeting. He'd been a boy when I left, and yet this person who now approached me, whatever had blossomed with his wife, whatever has between them, it had made him into a man. There was nothing in my chest, my soul, for him beyond a vague sense of gratitude. A few more steps had us passing each other. I smiled broadly at them both, and bowed my head, wishing them well with my entire heart. The ball my father was throwing in my honor was in 2 days, and the house was already a flurry of activity. Such money being thrown away on things we never dreamed of having again, even for a moment. I would have begged him not to host it, but Elaine had taken charge of planning and finding me a last-minute dress. And it would only be for an evening of enduring the people who had shunned us and let us starve for years. The sun was near to setting as I stopped my work for the day, digging out a new square of earth for Lane's new garden. The gardeners had been slightly horrified that another one of us had taken up the activity, as if we'd soon be doing all the work ourselves and would get rid of them. I reassured them I had no green thumb and just wanted something to do with my day. But I hadn't yet figured out what I would be doing with my week or my month or anything after that. If there was indeed a surge in the blight happening over the wall, if that Amarantha woman was sending our creatures to take advantage of it, it was hard not to dwell on that shadow in my heart, the shadow that trailed me every step. I hadn't felt like painting since I'd arrived, and that place inside me, where all those colors and shapes and lights had come from, had become still and quiet and dull. Soon, I told myself, soon, I would purchase some paints and start again. I slid the shovel into the ground and set my foot atop it, resting for a moment. Perhaps the gardeners had just been horrified by the tunic and pants I'd scrounged up. One of them had even gone running to fetch me one of those big floppy hats that Elaine wore. I wore it for their sake. My skin had already become tan and freckled from months roaming the spring courtlands. I glanced at my hands, clutching up the top of the shovel, calloused and freckled with scars, arcs of dirt under my nails. They'd surely be horrified when they beheld me splattered with paint. Even if you washed them, there'd be no hiding it, Nesta said behind me, coming over from the tree she liked to sit by. To fit in, you have to wear gloves and never take them off. She wore a simple, pale lavender muslin gown, and her hair halfed up and billowing behind her in a sheet of gold brown, beautiful, imperious still, as one of the high fae. Maybe I don't want to fit in with your social circles, I said, turning back into the shovel. Then why are you bothering to stay here? Sharp, cold question. I plunged the shovel deeper, my arms and back straining as I heaved up a pile of dark soil and grass. It's my home, isn't it? No, it's not, she said flatly. I slammed the shovel back into the earth. I think your home is somewhere very far away. I paused. I left the shovel in the ground and slowly turned to face her. Aunt Ripley's house? There is no Aunt Ripley's. Nesta's reached into her pocket and tossed something into the churned up earth. It was a chunk of wood, as if it had been ripped from something. Painted on its smooth surface was a pretty tangle of vines and foxglove. Foxglove painted in the wrong shade of blue. My breath hitched. All this time, all these months. Your beast's little trick didn't work on me, she said with quiet steel. Apparently, an iron will is all it takes to keep a glamour from digging in, so I had to watch as Father and Elaine went from sobbing hysterics into nothing. I had to listen to them talk about how lucky it was for you to be taking to some made-up aunt's house, how some winter wind had shattered our door, and I thought I'd gone mad. But every time I did, I would look at that painted part of the table, then at the claw marks further down, and know it wasn't in my head. I'd never heard of a glamour not working, but Nesta's mind was so entirely her own. She had put up some strong walls of steel and iron and ash wood that even a High Lord's magic couldn't pierce them. Elaine said you went to visit me, though that you tried. Nesta snorted, her face grave and full of that long simmering anger that she could never master. He stole you away into the night, claiming some nonsense about the treaty, and then everything went on as if it never happened again. It wasn't right. None of it was right. My hands slackened at my sides. You went after me, I said. You went after me to Prythian? I got to the wall. I couldn't find a way through. I raised a shaking hand to my throat. You trekked 2 days there and 2 days back through the winter woods? She shrugged, looking at the silver she'd pried from the table. I hired that mercenary from town to bring me a week after you were taken. With the money from your pelt, she was the only one who seemed like she would believe me. You did that for me? Nessa's eyes, my eyes, our mother's eyes, met mine. It wasn't right, she said again. Tomlin had been wrong when he discussed whether my father would have ever come after me. He didn't possess the courage, the anger. If anything, he would have hired someone to do it for him. But Nesta had gone with that mercenary. My hateful, cold sister had been willing to brave Prythian to rescue me. What happened to Tomas Mandry? I asked, the word strangled. I realized he wouldn't have gone with me to save you from Prythian. And for her, with that raging, unrelenting heart, it would have been a line in the sand. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, at this woman who couldn't stomach the sycophants who now surround her, who had never spent a day in the forest but had gone into the wolf territory, who had shredded the loss of her mother, then her downfall in icy rage and bitterness, because the anger had been a lifeline, the cruelty of release. But she had cared. Beneath it, she had cared, and perhaps loved more fiercely than I could comprehend, more deeply and loyally. Tomas never deserved you anyway, I said softly. My sister didn't smile, but a light shone in her blue-gray eyes. Tell me everything that happened, she said, in order, not a request. So I did. And when I finished my story, Nesta merely stared at me for a long while before asking me to teach her how to paint. Okay. All right. Nesta? Redemption arc or what? I missed all the good parts. Now he's near the end. Oh, we still have a while. The pillow's looking kind of sus. Shit. Is that better? Teaching Nesta to paint was about as pleasant as I had expected it to be. But at least it provided an excuse for us to avoid the busier parts of the house, which became more and more chaotic as my ball drew near. Supplies were easy enough to come by, but explaining how I painted, convincing Nesta to express what was in her mind, her heart. At the very least, she repeated my brushstrokes, with a precise and solid hand. When we emerged from the quiet room, we commandeered both of her splattered in paint and smeared with charcoal. The chateau was finished up its preparations. Colored glass lanterns lined the long drive, and inside, wreaths and garlands of every flower and color decorated every rail, every surface, every archway. Beautiful. Elaine had selected each flower herself and instructed the staff where to put them. Nesta and I slipped up the stones, but as we reached the landing, my father and Elaine appeared below, arm in arm. Nesta's face tightened. My father murmured his praises to Elaine, who beamed at him and rested her head on the shoulder. And I was happy for them, for the comfort and ease of their lifestyle, for the content on both my father's and my sister's faces. Yes, they had their small sorrows, but both of them seemed so relaxed. Nesta walked down the hall, and I followed her. There are days, Nesta said, as she paused in front of the door to her room across from mine, when I want to ask him if he remembers the years he almost let us starve to death. You spent every copper I could get, too, I reminded her. I knew you could always get more, and if you couldn't, then I wanted to see if he would ever try to do it himself, instead of carving those bits of wood. If he would ever actually go out and fight for us. I couldn't take care of us, not the way you did. I hated you for that, but I hated him more. I still do. Does he know? He's always known I hate him, even before we became poor. He let Mother die. He had a fleet of ships at his disposal to sail across the world for a cure. Or he could have hired men to go into Prithian and beg them for help, but he let her waste away. He loved her. He grieved for her. I didn't know what the truth was, perhaps both. He let her die. You would have gone to the ends of the earth to save your High Lord. My chest hollowed out again, but I merely said, yes, I would have, and slipped inside my room to get ready. Chapter 31. Chapter 31. Has you read the whole book? I have, yeah. If you guys want to catch up on the readings, !react. Everything gets uploaded there. Thoughts on Tomlin so far? I like Tomlin. He's cool. But he's yeah, he's all right. Yeah. He's okay. He's not my favorite character. I like Lucian's wit. He's kind of funny. Rhysand. I like Rhysand's tone when he speaks. I just met him. I don't know him well, but so far he seems pretty cool. I like his character. Yeah, Tomlin's he's too much of a good boy. Yeah, he reminds me of your happy-go-lucky golden retriever, haha, church-going guy, where he's just always good. Which is good. Don't get me wrong. He's a great guy. So, I like him, but I like Resend. I think he's very chaotic in a way. Whenever the subathon does end, I'll miss this and the piano parts, all the late night stuff, and interesting talks. There's something special that subathons and similar create. Yeah, subathons are nice. That's true. So, are you golden retriever coded? I don't know. You know, I don't know. I don't know whether golden retriever or black cat. I don't really know, to be honest. He gives me Labrador retriever. Huh. Interesting. Both. I've gotten both before. I've had people say I'm either golden retriever or black cat. I've had both. I've had people say I'm black cat energy. I don't know. Why do you have an anime body pillow? Why not? Who knows? All right, let's read another chapter. Let's read another chapter. The ball was a blur of waltzing and preening, a bejeweled aristos of wine and toast to my honor. I lingered at Nesta's side because she seemed to do a good job of scaring off the two curious suitors who wanted to know more about my fortune, but I tried to smile, if only for Elaine, who flitted about the room, personally greeted each guest and dancing with all of their important sons. But I kept thinking about what Nesta had said about saving Tomlin. I'd known something was wrong. I'd known he was in trouble, and not just with the blight on Prithian, but also that the forces gathering to destroy him were deadly, and yet I stopped looking for answers, stopped fighting it. Glad, so selfishly glad, to be able to set down that savage, wild part of me that had only survived hour to hour. I let him send me home. I hadn't tried harder to piece together the information I'd gathered about the blight or Amarantha. I hadn't tried to save him. I hadn't even told him I loved him. And Lucian had known it too, and shown it in his bitter words on my last day. His disappointment in me, 2 a.m, and yet the party was showing no signs of slowing. My father had held court with several other merchants and aristomen, to whom I had introduced, but whose names I'd instantly forgot. Elaine was laughing among a circle of beautiful friends, flushed and brilliant. Nesta had silently left at midnight, and I didn't bother to say goodbye as I finally slipped upstairs. The following afternoon, bleary-eyed and quiet, we all gathered at the lunch table. I thanked my sister and father for the party, and dodged my father's inquiries regarding whether any of his friends' sons had caught my eye. The summer heat had arrived, and I propped my chin on a fist as I fanned myself. I had slept fitfully in the heat last night. It was never too hot or too cold at Tomlin's estate. I'm thinking of buying the better land, my father was saying to Elaine, who was the only one of us listening to him. I heard a rumor it'll go up for sale soon, since none of the family survived, and it would be a good investment property. Perhaps one of you girls might build a house on it when you're ready. Elaine nodded interestingly, but I blinked. What happened to the Bedders? Oh, it was awful, Elaine said. Their house burned down and everyone died. Well, they couldn't find Claire's body, but... She looked down on her plate. It happened in the dead of night. The family, their servants, everyone. The day before you come home. To us, actually. Claire Bedder? I said slowly. Our friend, remember? Elaine said. I nodded, feeling Nesta's eyes on me. No, it couldn't be possible. Had to be a coincidence. Had to be a coincidence, because the alternate... I had given that name to rescind. Oh. Oh no. I had given that name to Resend, and he had not forgotten it. My stomach turned over, and I fought against the nausea that roiled within me. Feyre? My father asked. I put a shaking hand over my eyes, breathing in what had happened, not just at the Bedders, but at home in Prythian. Feyre? My father said again, and Nesta hissed at him, quiet. I pushed back against the guilt, the disgust, and terror. I had to get answers, had to know if it had been a coincidence, or if I might yet be able to save Claire, and if something had happened here in the mortal realm. Then the spring court, then those creatures Tomlin had been so frightened of. The blight had infected magic, the lands, fairies. They had come over the wall and left no trace behind. I lowered my head and looked at Nesta. You must listen very carefully, I said to her, swallowing hard. Everything I was told you must remain a secret. You do not come looking for me. You do not speak my name again to anyone. What are you talking about, Feyre? My father gaped at me from the end of the table. Elaine glanced between us, shifting in her seat, but Nesta held my gaze, unflinching. I think something very bad might be happening in Prythian, I said softly. I never learned what warning signs Tomlin had instilled in their glamours to prod my family to run, but I wasn't going to risk relying solely on them. Not when Claire had been taken, her family murdered because of me. Bile burned my throat. Prythian, my father and Elaine blurted, but Nesta held up a hand to silence them. I went on. If you won't leave, then hire guards. Hire scouts to watch the wall, the forest, the village too. I rose from my seat. The first sign of danger, the first rumor you hear of the wall being breached, or even something being strange, you get on a ship and go. You sail far away, as far south as you can get, to some place the fairies would never desire. My father and Elaine began blinking, as if clearing some fog from their mind, as if emerging from a deep sleep. But Nesta followed me into the hall, up the stairs. The Bedders, she said. That was meant to be us, but you gave them a fake name. Those wicked fairies who threatened your High Lord, I nodded. I could see the plan calculating in her eyes. Is there going to be an invasion? I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I was told that there was a kind of sickness that had made their powers weaken or go wild. A blight on the land that had damaged the safety of their borders and could kill people if struck badly enough. They said it was surging again, on the move. The last I heard, it wasn't near enough to harm our lands, but if the spring court is about to fall, then the blight has to be getting close. And Tomlin was one of the last bastions keeping the other courts in check, the deadly courts, and I think he's in danger. I entered my room and began peeling off my gown. My sister helped me, then opened the wardrobe to pull out a heavy tunic and pants and boots. I slipped into them and was braiding back my hair when she said, We don't need you here, Feyre. Do not look back. I tugged on the boots and went to the hunting knives I've discreetly acquired while here. Father once told you to never come back, Nesta said, and I'm telling you now, we can take care of ourselves. Once I might have thought it was an insult, but now I understood. I understood what a gift she was offering me. I sheathed the knives at my side and slung a quiver of arrows across my back, none of them ash, before scooping up my bow. They can lie, I said, giving her information I hoped she would never need. Fairies can lie, and iron doesn't bother them one bit, but ash would. That seems to work. Take my money and buy a damned grove of it for Elaine to tend. Nesta shook her head, clutching her wrists. The bracelet of iron, still there. What do you think you can even do to help? He's a High Lord. You're just a human. That wasn't an insult either, a question from a coolly calculated mind. I don't care, I admitted at the door now, which I flung open, but I've got to try. Nesta remained in my room. She would not say goodbye. She hated farewells as much as I did. But I turned to my sister and said, There is a better world, Nesta. There's a better world out there, waiting for you to find it. And if I ever get the chance, if things ever get better, safer, I will find you again. It was all I could offer her. But Nesta squared her shoulders. Don't bother. I don't think I'd particularly fond of fairies. I raised a brow. She went on with a slight shrug. Try to send word once it's safe, and if it ever is, Father and Elaine can have this place. I think I'd like to see what else is out there. What a woman might do with a fortune and a good name. No limits, I thought. There were no limits to what Nesta might do. What she might make of herself when she found a place to call her own. I prayed I would be lucky enough to see it someday. Elaine, to my surprise, had a horse, a satchel of food, and supplies ready when I hurried down the stairs. My father was nowhere near in sight. But Elaine threw her arms around me and held tightly and said, I remember all of it now. I wrapped my hands around her. Be on your guard, all of you. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I would have liked to see the continent with you, Farah. I smiled at my sister, memorizing her lovely face, and wiped her tears away. Maybe someday, I said. Another promise that I'd be lucky to keep. Elaine was still crying as I spurred my horse and galloped down the drive. I didn't have it in me to say goodbye to my father once more. I rode all day and stopped only when it was too dark for me to see. Due north. That's where I would start and go until I hit the wall. I had to get back. Had to see what had happened. Had to tell Tomlin everything that was in my heart before it was too late. I rode all of the second day, slept fitfully, and was off before first light. On and on through the summer forest, lush and dense and humming, until an absolute silence fell. I slowed my horse to a careful walk and scanned the brush and trees ahead for any sign and any ripple. There was nothing, and then my horse bucked and shook her head. It was all I could do to stay in the saddle as she refused to go forward. But still, there was nothing, no marker. Yet when I dismounted, hardly breathing, as I put a hand out, I found what I could not pass. There, cleaving through the forest, was an invisible wall. But the fairies came and went through it, through holes, rumor claimed. So I led my horse down the line, tapping the wall every so often to make sure I hadn't veered away. It took me 2 days, and the night between them was more terrifying than any I'd experienced at the spring court. 2 days before I spied the mossy stones placed across from each other, a faint whorl carved into them, a gate. This time, when I mounted my horse and steered her between them, she obeyed. Magic stung my nostrils, zapping until my horse bucked again. But we were through. I knew these trees. I rode in silence. An arrow knocked and ready. The threats lurking in the forest, far greater than those in the woods I just left. Tomlin might be furious. He might command me to turn around and go home. But I would tell him that I was going to help. Tell him that I loved him and would fight for him however I could, even if I had to tie him down to make him listen. I became so intent on contemplating how I might convince him not to start roaring that I didn't immediately notice the quiet, how the birds didn't sing, even as I drew closer to the manor itself, how the hedges of the estate looked in need of a trim. By the time I reached the gates, my mouth had gone dry. The gates were open, but the iron had been bent out of shape as if mighty hands had wrenched them apart. Every step of the horse's hooves was too loud on the gravel path. My stomach dropped further when I beheld the wide open front doors. One of them hung at an angle, ripped off its top hinge. I dismounted, arrow still at ready, but there was no need. Empty. It was utterly empty, like a tomb. Tom? I called. I bounded up the wrong steps, and I bounded up the front steps and into the house. I rushed inside, swearing as I slid on a piece of broken porcelain, the remnants of a vase. Slowly, I turned into the front hall. It looked as if an army had marched through. Tapestries hung in shreds. The marble banister was fractured, and the chandeliers lay broken on the ground, reduced to mounds of shattered crystal. Tomlin? I shouted. Nothing. The windows had all been blown out. Lucian? No one answered. Tom? My voice echoed through the house, mocking me. Alone in the wrecking of the manor, I sank to my knees. He was gone. Chapter 32. All right. It's 3 chapters. We have, I think it's like 40, 43, let's see, 44, 45 chapters. Yeah, it looks like 45 chapters. We're on 32, so only 13 chapters left. All right. It's good. Kind of filler, a bit filler, but nevertheless pretty good. You know, my theory was that she would get captured. Listen, my theory was that she was going to get captured by Resend, right? And technically he did, but under the different name. I should have known that he would capture the fake name that she gave him. Yeah, I should have known that. I'm so stupid. A smarter version of me would have known. But regardless, I got it right. But now what happened to Tomlin? Interesting. What's your arms at? Which one? This one? Butterfly.